you have some rather contrarian views on inflation. And inflation is something we hear the narrative that it is coming down and that soon the Fed will be able to cut rates, will have to cut rates because of a slowing economy. But you don't quite have that view, at least when it comes to inflation.
I think inflation is something that that perhaps caught markets and households and investors by surprise, and perhaps it's becoming more the norm to see it sticking around. But traditionally, inflation expectations have been very persistent recently. In the last few years, we've had very low inflation expectations. So I think it's natural. We've had very low inflation, and that gave rise to low inflation expectations. And so I think it's natural to think that inflation is going to abate and we're going to go back into a very low inflation regime. I disagree. On the other side, I don't see any hyperinflation expectation, but I think that we're going to normalize around a positive rate of inflation, which has been in question over the past few years, and I think it's no longer going to be in question. I think there are several reasons from a macroeconomic perspective why we're not going to see a sudden return to an ultra low inflation environment. One has been the reversal of globalization, at least partially. We saw a decline in prices on trend ever since China joined the WTO at the start of the millennium. And there was a lot of downward pressure on prices with globalization, and that at least partially has started to reverse, and some of it's probably not going to come back anytime soon. Another aspect is that we heard about Moore's law for such a long time, and now it appears to be something of the past. And I'm not saying that there's not going to be any new technological innovation. I think there is, but it's going to be a challenge to find it. I don't think that just ever cheaper, ever larger capacity semiconductors is going to be a very steady, dependable source of downward price pressure for producers especially. There's also probably a lot of interim, maybe not long-term, but geopolitical pressures that are supply shocks, unrest that are likely to keep prices on the rise rather than the decline. And then we've seen the other side of some of the demographic pressures that we thought were going to bring deflation, which is labor supply shortages. So we learned that demographics can also lend itself to inflationary moves, which is a completely different interpretation than we had a few years ago.